Lately, there have been a ton of warning signs that the economy is heading towards disaster. And one of the most recent ones is the fact that so many people are raiding their retirement funds right now to basically fund their lifestyle today. And the purpose of a retirement account is to actually have some money to fall back on when you're too old to work or you're forced to retire, whatever your situation might be in the future. Well, more and more people are starting to borrow against this money or just withdraw the money early because they need it. And that's not a good sign of where things could be headed in the future, because not only does it mean life is too expensive today, but if it's too expensive today, imagine how expensive it's going to be in the future, okay? So that's one of the biggest problems I see from this, is the fact that if people can't afford life today, and when we have inflation and the cost of living only goes up over time, it never goes down, how are people going to pay for their bills in the future? And this is what's going on. The number of people that are taking hardship withdrawals from their 401ks was up 13% in the third quarter versus the second quarter of 2023. This is according to Bank of America, and this is just people that took a Bank of America surveys. This is not even representative of the entire country. So that just goes to show you that the actual number of people out there doing this could be far higher than what this data suggests. Because what this data says is that those 13% make up about 18,000 people who are taking hardship withdrawals from their 401k. But what about all the people that were not surveyed? That's what I want to know about. So this is the highest amount that Bank of America has ever recorded since they started keeping track. And it's the highest level that we've seen in the past 5 quarters, or basically the last year and a half. This number's up 27% from the beginning of this year. So this is pretty serious. And it's no surprise that Bank of America is naming the reason why this is happening is it all boils down to high inflation and a higher cost of living. And like I said at the beginning of this video, isn't that synonymous with the future, guys? High inflation, or at least ongoing inflation, is always part of the Fed's plan. They didn't, you notice they didn't say they want to get inflation down to 0. They need to have inflation at 2% in order to have the economy growing at the pace that they want it to. But inflation means that your money gets devalued over time and the cost of living continues to go up. So once again, if people can't afford it now, how in the world are they going to afford it later? Now, the average hardship withdrawal, according to Bank of America, is a little over $5,000, which is on par with where it was before. And the amount of people who are borrowing against their 401ks is also increasing. The amount of people who got a loan from their 401k in the third quarter was 2.5%, which was the same as it was in the second quarter, and it's up from 1.9% in the first quarter of this year. So it's steadily been on the rise. And the average loan amount is actually far higher at over $8,500. And it turns out the people who are borrowing the most right now against their 401ks are people who are Gen X and Millennials. So pretty much anybody who was born between 1965 and 1996 are the people that are hurting the most right now and supposedly need this money. They interviewed a certified financial planner in this story, and this guy says that things are starting to crack. This is a direct result of the Fed raising interest rates, and we're just starting to see the effects of these hikes, whether it's auto loans at almost 10%, mortgages at 8%, or credit cards at 20+% interest rates. Add on inflation and the resumption of student loan payments, budgets are stretched to the max for almost everyone but the very wealthy. Now, you can't always believe everything everybody says, but this is definitely a statement of truth here. And this is exactly what I've been saying over the past year and a half, that this is where things are headed, and it's only going to be a matter of time before people can no longer keep up with these bills. And one quick note in here that's important to mention is it says that if you leave your current employer and you took a hardship loan, then you could be forced to repay that loan in its entirety and the taxes up to 10% if you're under 59 and a half. So this can have also even further implications for people that are taking on these hardship loans, and then let's say 2 years from now they decide to get a different job. You might be forced to pay that all back, guys, and I'm willing to guess that if people need that money for whatever reason, they're probably not going to have it when that time comes. So sounds like trouble. And one thing I completely agree with here is they say that taking a loan or a withdrawal from your 401k should be a complete last resort. This is not something you ever really want to do unless you have no other options, guys. And they even advise people like, hey, listen, before you actually invest and start a 401k, you should have an emergency fund, because that's the money that you should be using in an emergency, not your investment money. And that's something I also actually agree with. This story actually has some solid financial advice, but the problem is people aren't following it. And speaking of investing, I saw this post on X the other day that just totally makes a ton of sense. Check this out. By the time I'm 67, over $600,000 would be paid into Social Security on my behalf. That money would have been worth $1.9 million if I had gotten a 5% return. My annual interest would be $95,000. The government promises me $3,075 a month at age 67, which is $37K a year. How is that not theft? Man, I couldn't agree with that more, right? You guys probably know that I don't like paying taxes, and Social Security is just another form of tax if you ask me. Well, if people could be allowed to invest this money instead, they wouldn't need to collect Social Security. They should give people the option like, hey, maybe instead of paying Social Security, you can just make your own investments, but you have to be forced to do it. Check this out, guys. I used to come here all the time to make videos. Now they put this stupid fence here. I used to go all the way back there by the boats and behind the fire station here. No more. That's a change since I came back from California. Little by little, they're locking people out of the pretty parts of the city. So I guess we're gonna have to walk back and forth by the church here. But you know what I mean? The government's always wanting to raise taxes, to pay for this, to pay for that, and give people more money on Social Security. Well, instead of doing stuff like that, why don't they just allow people to be able to make these investments 100%? Instead of saying, hey, listen, instead of paying Social Security, you can take the amount that you're paying in Social Security and contribute it to a retirement fund, but it has to be 100% required, and you cannot be allowed to borrow against it like we just talked about. No hardship withdrawals from this account, no borrowing against it and paying it back later with interest, none of those games. But why don't they do that? Because the people who are living on Social Security right now would be broke if they did this. That's the real reason why they won't ever let this happen. And it's also one of the reasons why Social Security is basically one big Ponzi scheme, because without the people at the bottom paying, people at the top will never be able to survive. And so on and on it goes. Now, in another story that backs up what I just said, it's talking about how millennials are basically in the worst financial shape out of any generation right now. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, we have real wages that are falling negative right now, which affects all households, but particularly in the millennial generation. And we already know, based on what we just talked about, that millennials are being forced to take out hardship loans from their 401ks or just make early withdrawals altogether and pay the penalty. But on top of that, they're turning to their credit cards. They're turning to emptying out the balance in their savings account and doing all sorts of things like that in order to just make ends meet right now. Look at this huge iguana over here, guys. And there he goes. He's probably gonna jump in the water. Whoa! He made a leap to that boat. That was one hell of a jump, dude. That was pretty funny. And by the way, guys, sorry I have to walk back and forth a little bit. I guess I'm not gonna be coming to this spot anymore because I just found out today this spot is no longer as great as it used to be. So bear with me for this one. Now, the reason why millennials are in the worst financial shape compared to any other generation right now is because they are having the largest increase on their credit cards in terms of balances right now. At the same time, they also have the highest amount of delinquencies over any other generation, guys. That is horrible. And people who are carrying revolving balances on their credit cards right now are getting absolutely smashed. In the third quarter of 2023, the average credit card interest rate was 21%, and that's up from 15% in the first quarter of 2022. So these high interest rates are just making it harder and harder and harder to not only get out of your current debt, but it adds more debt. And as you continue to take out more debt, you just get clobbered with these interest rates. And it's a vicious cycle, man, it really is. And this problem for millennials is getting so bad that delinquencies are now above pre-pandemic levels for people in this age group. So get ready, guys. People are not able to pay their bills. I don't know how many times I have to keep saying that here on the channel, but I feel like a lot of people just aren't going to believe it until they see it for themselves or it actually happens to them. But the fact that it's happening to a lot of other people out there should be a good enough wake-up call for you. And if you don't believe me, well, just ask Discover how they feel about these delinquencies, because they said that the number of charge-offs that they had last quarter climbed by 1.8 percentage points from a year earlier. Now it's at 3.5%. Capital One, they're saying the same thing. The charge-off rate averaged 4.4% in the third quarter of this year, which was well above the 3.9% rate recorded in September 2019 before COVID. And this all has pretty negative consequences for the future, because if people can't pay these bills, their credit scores go down, first of all. It makes getting credit for anything in the future much more difficult. Like, forget about getting a loan for a house or a new car or another credit card, which ultimately reduces spending and the amount of buyers in the real world, which is not good for the economy. It's putting millennials far behind where they should be in terms of home ownership, because about 42% of millennials owned a home by age 30 and 51% of baby boomers owned a home by age 30 respectively. So they're pretty far behind, considering it's the second largest generation compared to the baby boomers. But I know some people are just horrible at spending, they were never taught about money, and they just blow everything that they make and then some, and that puts people in this position. Or some people really are genuinely having a hard time. They just don't make enough money to keep up with today's cost of living. But either way, this spells trouble. Here's another sign that things are breaking down right now. Google, Amazon, Zillow, and Nextdoor, all big tech companies, guess what? Guess what they're doing, guys? They just announced more layoffs coming. Another round of layoffs this fall for all these tech companies. And check this out. If you don't think this is a big deal, just in the last month alone, in the Bay Area, about 17,000 tech jobs were lost. That is tremendous. Nobody's talking about this. Nobody's talking about how a lot of people are starting to lose these high-paying jobs and what kind of implications that might have on the future of this country in the near term. Because the less people make, the less they can go out and spend, guys. And the less people spend, the worse businesses do, the more layoffs they have to perform because they're not making their fair share of profits, and it's just another vicious cycle, just like getting into debt. And guess what's causing all these layoffs? Believe it or not? Oh, high interest rates. So what would high interest rates have to do with all these layoffs? Well, don't forget, guys, all these tech companies, just like many countries across the world, like we talked about in yesterday's video, survive and thrive on debt. Well, now that debt is becoming far more expensive, prohibitively expensive, or sometimes inaccessible in some cases, these companies are being forced to scale back. And since we're only just now starting to see cracks form in the economy from these high interest rates, and we already know that interest rates are likely to stay higher for longer, what do you think that's going to mean in a year from now or 2 years from now? Especially since interest rates have a delayed effect on the economy. I think what it means is buckle up and get ready for things to not be good for the rest of this decade. That's what I think. I think it's not going to turn around until the end of the 2020s, guys, maybe even 2030, because things haven't even begun to seriously crash yet. And once it actually does, it's probably going to be a multi-year thing. And it's also going to take multiple years to get back to any sort of normalcy if our governments actually even allow that to happen to begin with. Because it seems like nobody wants to have any sort of crash on their watch, and they'd rather just inflate the debt balloon past the point of no return and let things explode that way, rather than let the economy pick up its pieces naturally and let capitalism do its work. And we see this in all facets of life. You know, we just covered how people need to borrow all this money just to pay for things, right? Well, you know what else isn't normal? Is the fact that owning a home now is far more expensive than you probably think. Like, the gap between renting and owning is just not even close anymore. And this has a serious implication on the future of the housing market too, because what this means is that fewer current renters are going to be looking to become homeowners, because number one, the cost difference is tremendous and it's just cheaper to rent right now. And the number two thing is that people, even if they want to, they can't qualify to get a loan under these conditions. And so the most likely outcome from all of this is that we're probably going to see more and more inventory to continue to build on the housing housing market, as people can no longer afford to buy at these prices and rates, it's surely going to put the reverse pressure on the housing market. The same pressure that made prices go up is now going to be put in reverse to make prices ultimately come down. So personally, I hope people are going to be able to turn this around, but unfortunately, I think the only way most people are ever going to be able to turn around their financial situation is to just make more money, guys. Like, you can only cut back so much on expenses, which you definitely need to do if you know you're a big spender and you know who you are, if that's you. But if you're already very frugal and you're still having a hard time making it, then the unfortunate reality is there's no more cutting back that can be done, and the only thing that you can do from here is to just make more money. So I encourage anybody who's having problems with financials right now and is somebody who's in this debt and is taking these hardship withdrawals and things like that, try to start thinking outside the box, guys. Try to start figuring out a way to make extra money. There's never been a greater time in history to do that, thanks to the internet. Like, there are so many different opportunities out there, and I'm not going to get into all the different ways that people can make money, even just online. The amount of ways is staggering. It's time for people to start going back into the side hustle. You know, the easy days are over. The days of all the money coming in from the pandemic and stimulus are completely done. And if you're going to pull yourself out of this, it's going to be because of your own effort. So if you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to the channel. And if you don't want to wait for my next video to come out, check out this one on the screen right over here, and I'll see you in the next one.